Welcome to the World War I podcast, produced by the MacArthur Memorial. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore a wide range of interesting topics related to World War I. This podcast is sponsored by the Ernst and Gertrude Tico Charitable Foundation. The historiography of World War I is dominated by the Western Front. Additionally, the voices of the Central Powers, especially those of ordinary soldiers, are often missing or inaccessible, particularly for English language audiences. A Tale of Two Fronts, a German soldier's journey through World War I, the memoir of Hans Schiller, helps fill this gap. Enlisting in the Imperial German Army at age 17, Schiller fought on the Eastern Front for most of the war, experienced its final months in the West, and then continued to serve until May 1920 in the Freikorps. A Tale of Two Fronts is truly a unique account. It was translated by Schiller's granddaughter, Karin Wagner, and edited by Dr. Gregory Loving and Dr. Frederic Krome. And today we have the pleasure of hosting them all on the World War I podcast. Welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as mentioned in the introduction, this memoir is truly unique. Could you start us off with when was it written and when did it come to light?
Yes, this memoir was actually written in 1928, and it was based on meticulous diaries that my grandfather, Hans Schiller, kept during World War I. Unfortunately, these diaries have been lost. In 1928, my grandfather suffered from a case of scarlet fever and was quarantined. He was quarantined for about 6 weeks, and he decided to take out his diaries and recreate his war experiences in a journal format. How it came to light was my mother was quite ill, but she had not told too many people about how she was feeling. I did not know she had cancer at the time, terminal cancer. She invited me to her home to show me some family items, heirlooms that she wanted me to keep. And after she showed me a lot, I was in one of the rooms and I started looking through drawers. And I opened one of the drawers and I found this journal. I had never seen it before. I'd never heard of it. And I asked my mother about it, and she told me it was my grandfather's recollections of his World War I memories.
I think we also, by the way, just to elaborate, the original diaries were lost near the end of World War II, not during World War I.
Correct.
Well, that's really just an amazing find. Tell us a little bit about Hans Schiller's life leading up to the start of World War I.
Well, he was actually very young when World War I started. He was only 17, but he was born in Bromberg, which was then a part of Prussia. Now it was annexed later after World War I, became Poland. His parents, Adele and August, married very late in life. She was in her late 30s and he was in his late 50s. That was quite unusual. And they had one child only, who was Hans Schiller, my grandfather. And he grew up in a very privileged type of background, being an only child, and also his father was quite well off. He was an architect. Many buildings in Bromberg still remain that he designed. And he was also an industrialist. So he did have every privilege afforded to him growing up. And like many young people, when he realized World War I was upon the country, he had this great sense of nationalism, wanted to enlist, and thought that the war would be over very quickly. He'd have a great adventure, and then he'd come home a hero. But things didn't quite work out that way.
One of the really interesting parts of the beginning of the memoir to me is how he finds out about the start of the war. Can you tell us about how he finds out, where he is when he finds out, and then how does he respond to Germany entering the war later?
As Karin mentioned, he was a student at the time, and he was actually on holiday in Austria. So he was looking at some historical battle sites. He was climbing in the mountains, and he was actually in the mountains when war was declared. And a fellow hiker basically said, hey, did you hear that Austria declared war today on Serbia? And so he didn't know. So he found out that way. And the vacationers and hikers were talking about it. So later he's in a cafe, and a lot of the Austrians are saying how indeed this will be a quick battle. And Schiller had a very keen eye for like character and scene and for noticing the people around him. And he notices that there are a group of Czechs sitting in the corner that were very quiet and weren't saying much. And that there were people saying, well, no, the Serb soldier is highly respected. And they're not so sure that this will be as easy as as all of you are making out. And so he talks about that. He goes to a historic battle site and then goes back home looking for ways to enlist and noting how everybody's singing patriotic songs. There are a lot of people in the streets. There's a lot of people wanting news of this and talking about what's going to happen. And all the old guys from wars past are telling their war stories. And he notes, interestingly enough, that the university is almost empty because they all rush to join the military, and he is looking for a way to do that too. And he ends up taking a special test that kind of gets him in before his high school graduation. And just because he happened to accidentally go to the testing center right when they were giving the test, and he's a great writer, and so it was a written test, so he passed the test. And that actually got him a small promotion right at the beginning that benefited him in his military career.
Now, he's going to serve on the Eastern Front for most of the war. How did young men like Schiller view the East?
The standard German Central European view of the East is that it was semi-barbaric in most cases. They regarded the Slavic as not necessarily subhuman, and that's a sort of a World War II motif, but they regarded it as somewhat untamed. They very much conflated the nature and the physical setting as being rather wild and untamed, and they regarded that as a reflection of the Slavic character of being rather untamed and rather wild. What's interesting also about Schiller is that he was unique in that respect that the view of the middle-class German of the Eastern Jews tended to be very, very negative, but he only mentions the Jewish inhabitants once, and it's not a negative reference, it's rather neutral. So he seems to have been somewhat inoculated against some of the casual anti-Semitism you will find amongst many Germans when they looked at the East, which also included, by the way, very assimilated German Jews who did not regard Eastern Jews as particularly beneficial to civilization, might be the polite way to put it. So his view of the East was very much cultured or reflecting the culture of the time, but he also had a sense of the nuance of it. So as you read through the diary, you do get the sense that he's impressed by the wildness and the freedom of the nature, but he's not entirely comfortable with the inhabitants. And while he doesn't have a sort of disdain for them as explicit, neither is he particularly feel a kinship to them.
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting kind of perspective that he had on some of that. I also found it interesting how he talks about horses and other animals at times. Mm-hmm. And I just think he seems to retain a remarkable level of humanity maybe throughout. I mean, he's experiencing some very difficult, some very traumatic things in this war, but he never seems to see people as, like you said, subhuman, and he seems to see animals too as something worthy of interest.
One, if I could add on to that, one of the things that struck me when I read the manuscript for the first time was his sense of empathy for both his fellow soldiers and for, as you say, he was particularly affectionate towards horses.
Right.
And I think that was something that sort of passed on to Karin, because she has also an affection for and runs a rescue organization for horses. So that's something that seems to be in the blood.
Mm-hmm. Walk us through his service on the Eastern Front.
So after he joins up, basically in August of 1914, he spends all of that fall training. So he trains as an artilleryman, which takes more training than your standard foot soldier. So he trains as an artilleryman and does not see service until January 1915. And that's basically in what is now Poland, Russia. They are pushing the Russians back. And so he first serves in Poland and into Russia, and then he is transferred up for basically the bulk of 1915. He serves in Kurland, which is current-day Latvia, Lithuania, pushing the Russians back up there. Those battles were very fast-moving. He served in a lot of locations. That's where we get his really first very vivid sense of what it's like, the chaos of the battlefield, the noise, the death all around him. And he really comes to the conclusion quickly that his fate's already sealed. If he's going to die, he's going to die. And if he's not, he's not. And that gives him almost a sense of peace just to keep going. So that remainder of 2015 is very chaotic for him. By the time 16 comes in, he's back in Russia. They have pushed the Russians back, basically to the Russian border. He's a little bit inside the Russian border at this time. And we reach kind of a stalemate in the war, which neither side really advancing all that much until the Russian Revolution in October of 17. And that's when the final kind of quick battles happen, and Russia gets out of the war, and then his fate at that time is up in the air. They don't know where they're going to be sent there. And that's his service on the Eastern Front. Actually, in a sort of a humorous moment in the manuscript, they're talking about how we don't know where we're going to be sent. They really hope they're not sent to the Western Front. They know it's a mess over there. He hopes they're going to be sent to Italy, because fighting against those Italians will be easy, and who wouldn't want to spend some time in Rome? So let's hope we go to Italy, and his hopes are dashed pretty soon as he finds out they're going to be sent to the Western Front.
After so much time in the East, what is his impression of the Western Front? I mean, you've mentioned that they're hoping not to go there, but when they finally get there, what is his impression of that?
Well, this is something interesting because I have read several accounts by other soldiers who had fought on the Eastern Front and then were transferred to the West, and it's very similar. On the one hand, he's absolutely appalled at the nature of trench warfare. He doesn't lose his empathy for his companions, but he gets very impatient at times with some of what he feels is the futility of the trench warfare system. And so he witnesses the beginning of the Michael Offensive in March of 1918, which also has one of the largest pre-battle artillery barrages in history. And but he doesn't have and when I read through it twice just to sort of, he doesn't have a real sense that other people had that, hey, this is going to be the end, we're going to win. I mean, he doesn't express a pessimism. But we have to remember he wrote this 10 years after the battles. So I don't know if he's post facto putting a memory on that, but he pretty much narrates it not as a triumphal advance of the German army, but as the challenges faced on finding food, ammunition shortages, casualty rates. He still has that sense of the ability to describe people very vividly. One of the things that struck me is it's October, the German army's in retreat, and they still send him home on leave. And so it's as almost as a standard operating procedure. Well, we're in headlong retreat, but it's your turn to go home. So we'll see you in a week. And so I would say that he's appalled, but he's trying not to appear appalled.
Do you want to share any other anecdotes from his time on the Western Front?
Well, briefly, the timeline of the Western Front. He's first deployed to Belgium for some training and retraining. And that's actually where he's promoted to lieutenant, finally, because his unit gets out from under this very autocratic, stern officer that won't gives them all this training, makes them do all this training, but won't give anybody any promotions. And so he's finally promoted with a lot of his companions on the Western Front, and is then deployed to this battle at Chemin-des-Dames, which is up to that point the largest artillery battle in human history. And then he is basically, they're advancing. And like Fred said, he really has a balanced attitude about this. He does believe they're doing well on the battlefield, but the supply lines are so weak, and he acknowledges that they want to keep going. They want to go to Paris. They're doing well, they want to go to Paris, but they don't know what the generals know. And so he acknowledges at that point that there are things the generals knew that we didn't, and we had no business trying to go to Paris. And so he basically participates in the phased retreat. So they have great success, but their line is basically only a shell, and it ends up crumbling. And so they basically do a fighting retreat until the armistice. He does take that one leave home. There's one really vivid scene where they're retreating and they're with officers being housed at the home of a wine merchant. And the wine merchant is like, well, I don't want the French to get all this. So we'll give you a taste of my wine cellar. And he describes drinking back through the years of vintages until they were back to 1879 or something like that. Just sharing these little, what they could find as they were retreating and going home.
So as we know, November 11th, 1918 is a pretty significant date. That is the date that we learn in school usually that the fighting stops. But it's not as simple as that, though, is it? Tell us about his kind of continued service even after the armistice.
One of the fascinating aspects of this journal, which has many fascinating aspects, is if you read the standard literature on the subject, on the Freikorps in particular, the emphasis tends to be on the ideological fervor of the volunteers, the chaos of the armistice, the German army returning to home, the sheer chaos of that home front, the food shortages and everything. But even with all that, what comes across as Schiller is that it's almost not having any prospects and it being very difficult to earn a living. He said, I'll just join the Freikorps because that's a paycheck. So he's the exact opposite of this image we have of an ideological fervor. I mean, he is anti-communist, but he's not fanatical, at least in his expressions. He's not fanatical in his anti-communism, doesn't like the Bolsheviks, isn't particularly thrilled with the new nations that are developing in the Baltic, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. But it's, as I say, it's almost a byproduct. He said, well, there's no options here, so I'm just going to join the Freikorps because I need a job. And he has nothing but contempt for so many of the people who he's serving with, especially the leadership. And so it's a much different image that he has of the people he serves with the Freikorps those he served on the Eastern Front. There, the sense of camaraderie is palpable, but the sense of I wouldn't go so far as to call it alienation. I'm not sure, Greg, if you could think of a better word for that, but distance might be the best way to put it. He kind of maintains a little bit more distance between himself and the people he serves with in the Baltic, and it's almost as if he's involved in any campaigns and seeing any fighting, it doesn't come through as vividly as it does where he talks about earlier in the memoir about his experiences on the battlefield, being under fire and everything. It's almost as if we're marching, counter-marching back and forth, and then, oh, by the way, I'm finished with my service.
Yeah, there's a lot more directly dealing with issues of incompetence in battle.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of friendly fire back and forth. They're getting fired on by civilians that think they're a different group. There's a lot of insurgency. In the countries that are developing themselves, there's the traditionalist old guard, which that's who the Germans are supporting. They're supporting the Lithuanians against Lithuanian Bolsheviks. And so you have all these political triangulations that keep changing, and a lot of like incompetence and chaos in the middle of the night where nobody knows who's shooting. And so everybody just starts shooting something, and there was nothing there to begin with, but everybody kept shooting at it. And then having to sort all this out and figure all this out. And there's a very famous friendly fire incident. Colonel Kolpak died in a friendly fire accident that Schiller was at, and he was there. And this might be the only thorough firsthand account of that friendly fire incident where Colonel Kolpak dies. And it's all because of a mix-up, because they have fur hats on. And everybody thinks that the Russians are the ones with the fur hats on. So they start shooting at the fur hats. And Colonel Kolpak stands up he realizes what's going on. He stands up to try to stop the shooting and ends up dying as a result of that. And so then after that, he moves down. That kind of falls apart. That unit falls apart, and he takes a job in another unit with another former commander he had that is doing the phased retreat from Poland as the lines are being redrawn and Poland is being created as an independent nation. And that's where he ends the war. That's where the Treaty of Versailles is finally signed, and his military service ends there. But he also notes that he had just met a wonderful woman that he was courting, and that is Karin's grandmother, whom he married soon after.
When I heard about this memoir coming out, I was very excited to read it because, again, there aren't always a lot of voices from the central powers that are that accessible to us here in the States. But when I realized that it was going to contain his time in the Freikorps, I just thought, wow, this is really, really very unique. So I would encourage people to read it to maybe understand a little bit more of that as well. Now, you mentioned the Treaty of Versailles, and in his memoir, it's very clear that he resents what he calls, and I quote, the dictates of Versailles, end quote. How did he view his World War I service long term? And how did that perspective then influence how he saw his duty to Germany in the decades that follow?
I think we can all chime in here because we've all got something to say, but I think one of the interesting issues with this book is to what degree he was subject to the stab in the back myth. Now, he clearly saw the political situation on the home front at the end of the war as a lot of political opportunists just taking that opportunity to take power. But I think it's an open question whether he truly believed that they were stabbed in the back. He's honest about kind of the politics on both sides, but for us, and especially Karin, because it's her grandfather, but for Fred and I, we've spent so much time with him. We really think we know him, and we like the guy. So this is one thing that we are kind of eager for the scholarly community to comment on, is this ongoing issue. Was this part of the stab in the back? That would be an easy way to dismiss what he has to say and dismiss the fact that he did serve as a Nazi officer during World War II. That gets a lot more complicated, and Karin could probably speak to that because the stories from her family on his attitude toward Hitler are very clear that he did not support that.
One of the things that when I read the manuscript and I just loved about it is for so long the historiography was dominated by Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front. And World War I, it's like you say about the German soldier, even when we have something on a German soldier, it's very often the Western Front, younger Storm of Steel dominating that. And having written this before All Quiet on the Western Front became the phenomenal bestseller it was, and before the follow-up novel that Remarque wrote, for example. But the fact that it was also written before the rise of Hitler. I mean, in 1928, Hitler is not even a minor politician. He's still on the fringes in Bavaria, not making much of a showing in the north where Schiller lived. And so the fact that he was non-ideological when he joined the Freikorps, that this is something written before, we're not reading back. He's not being defensive. Had this been written in 1946, it would have taken a much different tone, I think. So he's not being defensive about his wartime experience. He regarded it very, very honestly as a harsh time, yet he was very proud of his service, I think. He was proud of the people he served with. And so it gives us a rather fresh look at what was, yes, a middle-class young man who served as an enlisted man, eventually promoted to officer, and who, after the war, served briefly in the Freikorps, and then was bringing together most of his ideas. I think, and when you read this, what I think also comes across is he wasn't trying to write this necessarily for anybody else. He was writing this at first to get his own ideas down, to get his own sense of balance. It'd been 10 years since the war was over. It'd been 8 years since he was in the Freikorps. And now he's trying to, just understand his place in the world and what he had experienced. And so that's one of the reasons I enjoyed reading that. It wasn't colored by what happened later. And so you could, in a sense, I was able to suspend some of what I know would happen later and say that just reading it as a document from 1918, 1928 about the period before that.
Well, I'd just like to say that after the war, my grandfather didn't really have a lot of options. In those days, you went straight through university. Now, he'd gone through 6 years of an entirely different experience. He would have actually been too old to come back as a first-year student in the university, and essentially military and war was all he knew. He did then serve as a police captain once, the Versailles Treaty disbanded the military and there were just 100,000 left. And then he went back into the military later on. He actually loved the military. He loved this, not war, but the military. He loved the structure. He loved the dedication to it, the discipline, the camaraderie, and he was known as a great leader, actually, and teacher. And because of his fairness to everyone and just his whole attitude, coming into World War II, apparently, it just destroyed him. And he felt that World War II would be a repeat performance, if not worse, of World War I. And as you know in the book, what happens to him there, what he does. But I think when I read it, I was so proud of him because I had always had a different coloration or aspect of my grandfather's service even. I didn't know the man that he was. I never met him. Most of my family was wiped out in World War II anyway. And just reading that so late in my life gave me a new love, perspective, and just a great deal of respect for this man I never knew. But thank you to the journal and to Fred and to Greg. Now I've known him intimately, at least for 6 years of his life.
And if you want to know what happened to him in World War II at the end, buy the book.
Yes.
Any final thoughts?
I think just to illustrate, again, a couple of years ago, there was a big conference on World War I where they talked about the ego documents, as they say, what we used to just call the first-person accounts. And there used to be somewhat of a contempt for the post-war memoirs, but I think that's being rehabilitated, especially when you look at the published papers from this conference, which I reviewed a few years before I was acquainted with Hans Schiller. And it's nice to see, I think, that we're having less negativity towards these post-war memoirs, especially one written like his, as I say, not trying to settle scores, not trying to be defensive, but I was struck by his ability to be honest with himself and honest about the people he was serving with. And so that was something that really, I think, makes this a fairly unique document that could be very useful for teachers or scholars of the war.
Well, I thought it was a very, very unique memoir and a very, very interesting read. So thank you all so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you, Amanda, for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you to your editors.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at macarthurmemorial@norfolk.gov or find us on X at MacArthur1880 or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.